Well, so let's go back. Take me to like where your family was, both literally in the world and also just as a lifestyle that you end up finding yourself in Colombia and as a teenager.
Yeah, well, it's my parents were both from the same small West Texas town, but my mom, her parents had taken her overseas almost from the moment she was born. So she had this sort of expatriate uh, life. And my dad, meanwhile, grew up in West Texas, but he had always dreamed of adventure. And he actually, when he met my mom, when she came back to Texas for a 6 month stint in that small hometown in Texas, he met her and he was sort of mesmerized by her and the fact that she at that point had lived in Alaska and Canada and the Philippines, the Aleutian Islands of Alaska, the Philippines, and it travels a whole lot and was on her way to Kuwait. Her family was moving to Kuwait. And so he was just kind of blown away by that. And I think really it kind of, I think she was maybe the first real living human being that he met that, just open, made him realize that there are these people that can live these adventurous lives overseas. So there was never any question in his mind that that's what he wanted to do. And they eventually reconnected around, the college years and started dating and got married. Uh, but that's what he was going to do. And and my mom, there was no, for her, that's the way she had grown up. So there was no protest from her whatsoever. She wanted to keep living overseas as well. So I feel like, I'm extremely fortunate, me and my brother, because we're, third generation expatriates or whatever, like my grandparents, my parents and us. Um, I was born in West Texas, same area that my parents are from. But a month later, or day 10, I had my first passport, and within a month was on a plane to my grandparents were living in Iran at the time. So I spent my first Christmas there, and then we moved to the Philippines very, very shortly afterwards. And so that was just the way it was for me. Um, I it's probably to this day it's the one. I mean, there's a lot of things that I take for granted in my life, but that's the thing that I always knew was special. I think my parents always reminded me of that like one of these days you won't, you won't be doing this, or or maybe they couldn't know, maybe I would. I'm just kind of surprised I'm still in Dallas, Texas right now. uh, I would have assumed that I would just have kept it going as well. But yeah, so we lived in the Philippines for 19 years and got to travel the world in the meantime. We always came back to the US for summers. And so we would stop in different countries on the way there, on the way back. And then eventually, we knew we'd been there for a really long time. And my parents, my dad wanted to try somewhere else, but in the last decade or decade and a half of his career, he'd been in the Philippines for a long time. And my brother and I were, in, you know, like definitely excited when my dad got a job in Colombia during our senior year. It was kind of a weird time to move, but a lot of our friends had started going off to college, and we knew that it was over. And eventually, my parents were going to move, and so we had an opportunity to move with them during our senior year, to you know, and we would get to experience that before we went off to university.
Yeah. So when your dad said, "Okay, we're going to Colombia," were you like, "Awesome, I'm all for it"?
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to go because it was we've been in the Philippines for 19 years. My parents were going to move anyway. It was going to be some one sort of a last adventure before I graduated and went off to college. And Colombia had a reputation at the time, but we lived in the Philippines, which wasn't the safest place on earth at the time, either. But we knew that there were areas that you don't go. We also knew that you kind of kept a low profile. You didn't want to be the loud American drawing all this attention to yourself. So we sort of felt like we could navigate Colombia. Although, so they had this reputation, made you a little nervous, but we're like, we can handle that. We went through 7 coups while I was in the Philippines.
Right, right. And do you remember like first landing there, what your impressions were of the place? And I mean, did you feel settled at a certain point?
It, well, it was a constant comparison to the Philippines, and in so many ways there were similarities, and in so many more ways it was completely different. And as much travel as we had already done, most of it was in Asia or Europe, or but we hadn't been, we as a family really hadn't experienced South America, so it was there were so many new things to see. I mean, yeah, we kind of, there was the first few weeks you're trying to learn the lay of the land and make your friends and all that, but it didn't take very long for us to get to that point and to find the house that we were going to live in, and as a family. And then once we started going to school, I mean, even Robert, who's the guy that negotiated for my family, my best friend, I met him on my first day of school. He came up to me in the afternoon as we were wrapping things up at school, and introduced himself, and we turned out that we lived just like on the same block, and from that point on we were immediate friends. And my brother and I particularly, it was just like a dream come true. It was the senior year of our high school year, and it was one of, the country was dangerous and all that, but there was a real spirit for living that we didn't even get in the Philippines to that sort of extent. They knew how to, when you're 19, you want to go out and you want to drink and you want to dance and you want to have a good time. Colombia was the most amazing place in the world for that, and we made so many friends. And the best memories of my life, the most carefree period of my life, was those first few months there in Colombia. Loved it so much. And I still to this day do, because of that.